Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all tech topics that are smart home, home automation, security, and console gaming related. Today is Friday, October 23rd, 2020. Today marks the first customer shipments of the new iPhone 12. We had, as everybody knows, last week they took the avail off the new iPhone 12 with 5G, and I thought it'd be a great idea to talk to one of the esteemed tech people in the journalism field, and that is Dwight Silverman, who is he's a longtime friend, and actually I'm happy to say that, Dwight, you're also the longtime technology editor of the Houston Chronicle. Good morning, and how are you?
Fine, doing great today. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great. How long have you been writing for the Chronicle? Because I met you back in the early '90s when I was at Compaq, which is a million years ago, when they still had floppy disks.
Yes.
How long have you been with the Chronicle now?
I have been with the Chronicle since 1990. So this is my 30th year. I came to the Chronicle originally as an assistant state editor for our state news desk. And in 93, moved over to covering tech. And I've worked on the website as an editor and producer and, heading up various initiatives there. But a few years ago, came back to writing tech full time, and I'm really happy about it.
Well, you've been not only been a longtime friend. I just love reading your columns, and you've been doing now a blog, which I love your blog because it kind of gives you a taste of just the expansive range of tech topics that you're familiar with, and we're certainly going to get into it because you've been spending a lot of time recently on 5G and some of the some of the little gotchas there when it comes to 5G. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yes.
But let's talk about because I haven't spoken to you since Apple did announce the iPhone 12 5G family. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, what kind of struck you about the things about the 12 announcement itself? Were there anything that jumped right at you besides we'll get into the 5G component? But were there any elements that really jumped at you when you kind of got a chance to digest everything?
One of the things that did jump out at me was kind of what Apple didn't say. When you look at the phone, and again, this was done in, a pre-recorded, almost an infomercial for the iPhone.
It
was because they couldn't do it live.
Yes, a very well done infomercial, but it wasn't infomercial.
Yes, very slick, and there are things they didn't say. So for example, the iPhone, the new design, which is, from what I've seen, is just beautiful, is a hearkening back to the iPhone 4 and iPhone 5 design. And there was kind of no mention of, this kind of brings out that feeling and that oeuvre that the 4 and 5 did. But it's clearly, they're going back in terms of design language to the 4 and the 5. I was also surprised at how much Apple dove into 5G hype, that if you have read anything about the actual experience with 5G, the way they were talking about it, it was almost as though the early days of 5G, when the carriers were all going, oh, it'll change your life and straighten your teeth and it'll change everything. In fact, that phrase was used. And I think any of us who've been testing it and working with it in real world scenarios so far are underwhelmed. And, to me, it's almost like Apple almost should have known better. And when you read the reviews of people, and the coverage of it, almost every reviewer and every tech writer mentioned this, that 5G is not all that at the moment.
Right.
And that, to me, I think Apple should have played up the fact, and they did mention this, but I think they should have hit it harder, was that these phones are good for future 5G, that they handle a lot of the bands that are coming. Here in Houston, we were one of the first cities to get Sprint's mid-band back when Sprint, announced its mid-band coverage. And so here we've got the Sprint mid-band with T-Mobile. You've got the T-Mobile sub-6, and we don't yet have T-Mobile's millimeter wave, but Verizon and AT&T do. And so, eventually all cities, major cities around the country will be like that. And these phones are ready for it. And that's, I think, the way they should have hit it, as opposed to going back to hype that sounded like it came from 2 years ago.
Well, but let's look at it this way, though, and I understand where you're coming from. I think what was a relief to me, frankly, was because really nobody knew what implementation of 5G Apple was going to, the path they were going to go down. I had a concern initially that they would try to bifurcate 5G. They would try to say, oh, on the Pro phones, for example, we all knew they were going to do a Pro version of their phone, which has been their habit for the last several generations. That they might have the mid-band, the higher performing 5G capability, and high-end phones. They might have the lower performing 5G version, low-end phones. They didn't do that. I mean, they put 5G across the family, which I think is a great future-proof thing. But let's face it, anybody the limitations are really is because the carrier network still is kind of a work in progress, the way things are being laid out right now. And there has been a lot of odd reporting in that even when you go to a particular place that according to the coverage map has great premium performance 5G service, it may be in an odd place in a particular city. It's not as ubiquitous as you'd like to believe. And by the way, as we all know, to get the highest performing service, you have to have almost line of sight with the tower.
Stand under the tower.
Exactly. So I think there is a little bit of a let the buyer beware type of thing. Because, I think people are going to get these, $1,000 plus phones, take them home, and instantly think, why am I not getting this incredible performance they talked about at the event? So I agree with you that there probably will be a little bit of disappointment. But having said that, once Apple gets into the market, and I've said this before, they tend to validate the technology, which is a little unfair to others because let's face it, Samsung has been in the market for a long period of time with 5G phones. And, but Apple tends to get into it and it kind of tells the market, hey, okay, market, now it's time to upgrade your phone, which is a little bit disingenuous if you're a competitor, but that's the brand that Apple has.
Right.
But, before we go, hit the 5G piece even a little bit harder, there were some things about that I really do like what Apple has done from a competitiveness standpoint, really to keep their phones really bleeding edge. You talked about the design languages being upgraded, and from the photographs I've seen and some of the early pictures I've seen, it is certainly the idea is really very nice. But they are employing now ceramic materials for the phone itself, which they claim to have, I think it's 4x
in the glass,
better fall performance. Which I am sure it always intrigues me when I meet a friend and they're walking around with a phone that doesn't have a case on it. I've never quite understood that. You're walking around with $1,000 device, and that's of course that's what keeps those glass replacement huts that you see at malls in business, because people just, for whatever reason, they choose not to do that. I'm still a phone case guy, but I thought that was interesting. But we were talking before we started the podcast. What's your take on the MagSafe technology? What your thought on that?
So it's really interesting. Apple was late to the party with wireless charging, but once they did, they kind of went all in with it. and this is kind of an extension of that. Having magnets in the phone to which you can connect, a wireless charger that kind of immediately lines up with it is pretty cool. And then they extend that further and put it to use with accessories, so that you could snap accessories onto the back of it. My wife carries a phone with a case where it's designed for credit cards. And so she's, that's the kind of case she carries. And they make a little pocket that snaps onto the back on the camera. On the back of the iPhone 12 and holds onto it. The only thing I've read a couple of reviews where somebody that put it in their pocket and it slid the pocket slid off the magnet and fell on the floor. With the credit cards in it. Yes. So, let's say you're walking down the street, you just drop your phone in your back and you keep walking and you don't realize what's happened. There's your credit card, on the floor. So there will be some tweaks. There'll be some third parties who do interesting things with it. I think it's very cool.
Like,
I'm
think about
really,
Apple. Well, the amazing thing
huh?
at Apple is that they do these little things, and all of a sudden it spurs a $1 billion accessories business that
Right,
gets spun off on.
right.
And what I like about the MagSafe stuff is that I have a closet full of gadgets that I've bought over the years. I never throw this stuff out.
Mhm.
Just put them in boxes. For what's the optimal way to mount your phone in a car? Because before the pandemic, I was in the car a
Mhm.
lot, and things that don't really. I don't like gadgets that somehow force you to glue or adhesive on the dashboard.
Oh
Those
yeah, right.
drive me
Yeah, yeah.
crazy. I love the idea of some type of battery mount. That's let's say for example it goes to the cup holder, and if it's
Mhm.
secure enough, and that's really what I'm going to be curious about, is that MagSafe connection so strong that it will securely hold your phone in place on some type of mount inside the car. Yet it's not strong enough, so when you just want to just grab it and go, you just simply take it off. And by the way, this capability also has wireless charging built into it, so you can
Right,
also charge it
right.
at the same time. But it'll be interesting to see that way that rolls out. But you were saying something else, though, and I cut you off. I apologize for that.
Yes. So to briefly talk about the thing with the car, there already are magnet mounts for cars, but you have to have like a metal plate in the
Yes,
back of the case.
right.
And so it'll be interesting to see if it's integrated. The one thing about MagSafe is that I'm hoping, dearly hoping, that with them resurrecting the name, that they bring back some kind of MagSafe connection for their laptop computers, for the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. Because I have a 2014 MacBook Pro, as we were talking about, before we started, and I love the MagSafe on it. I probably would not have a 2014 MacBook Pro anymore if it hadn't had MagSafe on it, because it would have been destroyed the number of times I've kicked that cord. So I'm hoping that by resurrecting the brand, they bring back this capability in some form or fashion, maybe for their Apple Silicon notebooks in some way. That would be excellent.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did that. I mean, obviously they've been going down the USB-C path, for power
Mm-hmm.
on notebooks, but it would not, and Apple will do it right. I mean, we were talking before the call that
Right.
there are some knockoff companies that have adapters that you can plug into it, and they may or may not be very good for your
Mm-hmm.
notebook, and they probably may even void the warranty if there's any type of power damage that's caused by them. But I could see Apple have some type of a MagSafe adapter that plugs into the USB port, and then you just buy a MagSafe power supply like they do exist. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, think about how many notebooks you would have destroyed if you didn't have that in that era when you had that
Yes.
capability. Getting up, I hit the power cord, and the laptop goes flying across the table. That's
Right.
happened to me a few times.
Right. Right.
Did you think it was curious that going back to the 5G discussion, that the only carrier that was on stage or been part of that lavish virtual event that they did was Verizon? What struck me about that was that, if you recall, it was AT&T that really brought Apple to the party. With the first generation
Right.
iPhone
They
back.
were an exclusive with
And
AT&T
and
for
it
the
wasn't
first phone.
exclusive. So was it curious to you that to have Verizon on? It was not, there's obviously other carriers beyond Verizon, but they were like the vendor of the day, featured during that big announcement with Apple. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Verizon, I think, was ready to announce its nationwide 5G, which is actually kind of a nationwide 4G carve off of spectrum. But and I think that Verizon's 5G millimeter wave product is the closest thing to what people want 5G to be in terms of speed. I saw some reviewers who were wandering around on the streets of New York looking for towers that they could stand under, and they were getting like 2.5 gigabit down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was kind of, Apple was kind of wanting to show, here's what we all want 5G to be. What's interesting about Verizon is, and they're doing this in other cities, but in Houston was one of the first cities where it was here. Verizon has this 5G home service, which is uses 5G technology for fixed broadband. You mount a little antenna on the outside of your house, and there's a tower somewhere and it talks directly to it. It's essentially a competitor for AT&T and Comcast and Charter and so forth. And what they started doing in Houston is using those transmitters that are doing fixed broadband to also start broadcasting millimeter wave mobile. So suddenly, when you look at the coverage map for Verizon in Houston, there are these dark red areas along streets and in an increasing number of suburbs and neighborhoods where supposedly there is actual millimeter wave 5G for your phone. You're not going to be able to get it in your house, and you're not going to be able to get it even in your car. I've tested millimeter wave and it doesn't penetrate the windows on your car.
Right.
But if I go and sit on my front porch, I can have a millimeter wave experience. And so they're starting to expand it out, and to that extent, I'll give to Verizon the fact that that more and more people who bring one of these Verizon phones home, depending on where they live, and depending on whether Verizon is doing what they're doing here in Houston and other places, you actually could get that 5G experience that Tim Cook was crowing about.
And the interesting question will be, and this is really divorced from the Apple component itself, is that let's face it, if you do have a really full-blown 5G experience, that has interesting implications for the smart home, because that really could replace your pipe, your traditional cable pipe that might be coming to your house. And I think you're going to see a whole rise of devices where, once you can get that signal to your house in some way, and that might require some type of mini tower that you put on your house, so you avoid the line of sight issue. And there are all kinds of routers now are being developed. Netgear just came out with a router that takes that 5G signal at the router level and then converts to Wi-Fi 6. So you can then connect your home with Wi-Fi coverage. So that to me is going to be the interesting implication of 5G when it's really rolled out, because all of a sudden now you can get really, really great speeds that you can blow out throughout the entire house, and God knows all the kinds of devices you'll be able to attach to it. Let's spend a little bit of time. What I thought was interesting, because I got to get this in, is HomePod. What I was really struck.
The HomePod Mini, yeah.
Well, and they led with that. If you look at the event, and remember, all those Apple events are incredibly well scripted. They just don't do things in random order.
Right.
They led with the HomePod Mini, and it surprised me that, by the way, they priced it $99. I can't think of the last time an accessory was $99 at Apple. I mean, it was priced. You're going to buy 2 or 3 of these. I was expecting like $199, $249, but no, they were aggressive there. What's your thought? Because it kind of sounds like they talked a bit about their HomeKit strategy and their smart home strategy in general. Any commentary about, do you think there was some sea shift that you think that now Apple wants to use these HomePod Minis as kind of an Alexa alternative? The HomePod, it's too expensive, the standard one, to be an effective Alexa replacement. But what are your thoughts in terms of the way the new HomePod Mini fits into their overall smart home strategy?
I think it does indeed. It is more competitive with the Alexa and the Google Home devices. They still were emphasizing music to a certain extent. And they were talking about and the whole idea was that you buy multiple ones. The intercom feature, which is actually pretty cool.
Yes.
Is indicative of that. I don't put too much stock in it being the first item, because if they had done it after the iPhone, like everybody would have turned it off, at the end of the iPhone announcement. So I think they were kind of, I think it was kind of the prelude. But I think one of the, I loved the HomePod I tried as a review unit. The sound was incredible.
Yes.
And I'm really curious to see what the sound on this is like. And I would have bought maybe a HomePod, the original, if it had not been so expensive. If it was $149, I would have been a lot more interested in that device. What's interesting right now, and I was surprised at this, I believe that the HomePod will not work as a sound source for the Apple TV, which, you know, I could see buying a couple of these, putting them on, if you don't have a sound bar already, putting them on either side of your television and using them as sound. But apparently it doesn't yet work with that. I was kind of surprised at that. I think that would be a natural.
You brought up the original HomePod, and what frustrated me is that the original HomePod, if you recall, there were a lot of limitations to it. It did sound great,
right?
But you couldn't use it with Siri from a phone call. You could receive calls on it. You couldn't give calls on it. It almost felt like it was not ready for prime time, frankly, when they came out.
And those are all fixed now.
They fixed out those issues. What I really didn't like, and I remember when I reviewed it a couple of years ago, is because it connects via Bluetooth, right? Or is it through Wi-Fi?
It's Wi-Fi.
It's Wi-Fi, but there's significant. There was at least, and they have fixed it to a degree. It had significant latency issues. So if you were using it as a speaker, as your main speaker on your computer, if you're watching a YouTube video, the audio was always a bit out of synchronization. You know, so that kind of bothered me. But they've optimized that, and it's a little bit better in terms of if you want to use that as your core speaker off your system. But I think the HomePod Mini is going to be a secret hit. Not even a secret hit because it's out there. Nothing can be a secret at Apple. But I think it's priced to buy in volume. You know, you're not going to just buy one of them. You're going to buy two or three. That intercom feature is
that's the point, right?
It's tremendous. Right. You know that you can put those through all the house. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
The one downside to it is that Siri remains as dumb as a box of rocks, and is of the assistants, it is, to me, it is the least smart, and it's something, you know, I don't know why they can't get that, you know, to be really competitive with the Google Home and the Amazon Echo, you know, possibly because they're not willing to do what's necessary to pull in the smarts because of privacy issues. You know, they're really serious about, and so it has kind of a limitation there. But I think that, you know, if you think of it as a limited speaker, the other thing that Apple's doing in the future, which is interesting, and this could be placing it for that, is remember that Apple is involved with Google and with Amazon looking for a standard for smart speakers and digital assistants so that they all can interact with each other.
Right.
And I certainly can see the HomePod being part of that strategy as well.
No, I think that's actually a terrific observation, because let's face it, you know, most people are who have a smart home, either you're an Amazon person or you're a Google Assistant person, or or to a lesser extent, a Siri person. You don't see many people with like mixed environments because it's too complex. You know, not all the devices support every other device on the market. And the other thing that I always struggled with is that the smart assistants fail if for a nanosecond you have to think what the word is to invoke them. You know, and unfortunately, each of those devices have different ways to activate them. You know, so that's a challenge as well. But I do think some type of protocol or industry standard that would sort that out. You know, to me, a rising tide affects all boats, and that would certainly, I think, lift. Not that Amazon needs a whole lot of lifting with Alexa, but I still certainly think that would make people feel a lot better about interoperability between those types.
Well, and it's also designed for other smart home devices, but you know, it comes with a protocol that lets Wemo and Alexa devices and Google Home and HomePod all talk to each other as well. And so it'll be interoperable with that, and that's just as big a deal.
Yeah, and I want to talk about one other topic, but just to finish this off, the one thing I was a bit disappointed to hear is that, because I do have a HomePod, it's upstairs, which I really use, but you cannot use a HomePod and a HomePod Mini as stereo speakers. You can use two HomePod Minis, and you can use, I presume, you can do HomePods, but you can't do a mix and match type of thing, which that's a bit odd to me, why they wouldn't allow that capability. But there's
it may be, you know, they're serious about how good the sound is, and it could be that kind of combination would sound really weird.
Yeah,
because the speakers are so much smaller and so forth. You know,
exactly.
What I expect at some point with the HomePod, they may come after Sonos, you know, where the music can shift depending on what room you're in, and that would be really interesting too.
Last topic I want to hit, and I'm sure you'll have some spirited opinions about this, is you just bought a brand new iMac. I know that you're delighted with it, and you think the performance is unbelievable. There are rumors that there's going to be another announcement event in November. I think the date they're bouncing around is November 17th, although that hasn't been confirmed by Apple. But they are going to make some type of either Mac Mini, MacBook. Maybe it's that new overhauled iMac design, iMac with Apple Silicon. So let's talk a little bit about that, because your take on that. Are you good? Would you be a first adopter of a whatever it is, whether it's a Mac Mini or some type of desktop computer? Would you would you embrace a computer with a non-Intel or non-AMD processor for your Mac computing needs?
So I just bought this 27-inch Mac Mini, Mac iMac.
iMac, right?
And yeah, and so I ain't buying another desktop for a while, but like maybe till I die. But I am interested in a new portable, and one of the things that really intrigues me about, say, a future MacBook Pro or a MacBook Air that uses Apple Silicon is essentially it would have the same capabilities that an iPhone does. It would be a piece of cake to put a 5G chip in it. It would be a piece of cake then to give it the same kind of capabilities that an iPhone has. I think things like handoff would be vastly improved. I think it being able to interoperate with a newer Apple TV. I think it being able to do, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see AirPlay 3 come out as a result of that. And so the idea of having essentially a notebook computer that's actually an iPhone, or but is not necessarily an iPad, which Apple is kind of playing around with that form factor, I think is really intriguing. The battery life, the kinds of things you can do with graphics. I just think it's a really and AR and VR, I think are really interesting possibilities there. And so yes, I would definitely buy one. I don't know that I'd get version 1.0. If they did a MacBook Pro next year, I probably wouldn't get it. I probably would wait a year just for them to kind of figure out exactly what happens with these are in the wild. But I think I'm really interested in it. I'm really excited. But I do love my Intel iMac. It's awesome.
Well, what's going to be intriguing, I think, is the way they market different flavors of their Apple Silicon. I mean, for the life of me, I cannot believe they're just going to come out with like when you buy an iPhone or an iPad, it's one flavor of Apple Silicon. There's one processor in it, and they always tout the latest one as the fastest and greatest thing on the planet. But we've been trained for 35 years in the PC space that bigger clock speed, faster, it's more cores, et cetera, et cetera. For years, Apple has kind of railed against that because their belief is, well, don't concentrate on clock speed. There's other things you can focus on in terms of overall performance. But it's hard for me to believe as an old marketeer that they would not want to ignore the business opportunity is coming out with, 4 flavors of the iMac, just to throw that out there, with a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 in terms of performance and speed, in terms of upsells. So that to me is going to be interesting how they market that. Now maybe they don't do that. Maybe they come out with, hey, there's just one flavor and it's the best and greatest, and you don't have to think about it when you buy this version of the iMac or MacBook or MacBook Pro. It's coming with the best Apple Silicon out there from the performance standpoint. But that's going to be intriguing to me, the way if they decide to go down a more upsell type of path in terms of offering their different flavors of Apple Silicon.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that they may do it initially using the same chips, but over time they may want to increase the number of cores for their MacBook and desktop line. Certainly when they get to the iMac, they'll want to do that. And I don't know enough about chip architecture to answer this question. Maybe you do, but is it possible to pair multiple Apple processors together? So could you have 2 like A14 Bionic chips in an iMac,
Oh, it's very,
together?
it's very, very possible. That can be done.
Mhm.
I mean, there's always
Yeah,
a cost consideration, and
right.
software, the operating system has to be optimized and take advantage of multiple processors in the system.
Mhm.
That's certainly possible. So that's another path they could go down.
Right.
To me, I take it up 20,000 feet. It's Apple has always been about simplicity. They don't really want you
Right.
spending a lot of brain power thinking, do I really want to understand the internals of a processor architecture
Mhm.
so I can make a purchase decision? And
Mhm.
that's what intrigued me, getting back to the whole iPhone 5G announcement, is that yes, 5G was kind of the center star of the presentation, but the Apple has always been about that an embedded experience is the best experience. Meaning that,
Mhm.
it's not just about 5G, it's not about a great processor, not great hardware. It's the collection of all those 4 or 5 different disparate items that come together in a beautifully integrated manner that delivers this tremendous immersive experience from a computing performance standpoint. So, I could they do it? Sure, they could. But I always think they get concerned about, frankly, in terms about whether they muddle the message or not. That's why I think, to your point, while they did talk about a lot about 5G at the announcement, they didn't really get really need at the grass level into the technical delivery of 5G, because I don't think they want to lose people. I mean, let's face it. I bet you get calls and questions all the day from your readers and family members. 5G it's still a very elusive topic for the average consumer. Millimeter wave and sub 6 the sub 6 hertz band. That stuff is very
Mhm.
esoteric for the average
Right.
user. And I don't think if Apple has their druthers, they don't want really people focusing on that. That's a carrier
Yeah,
problem.
and I think that's from what I can tell from the communication I have, and of course, people who email me, I've written a lot about this, like a lot, like maybe am I doing too much?
Mhm.
And so, but my readers kind of understand that it's not what the hype has said it was now. And so I think that there's some education, when you certainly people who read technology writers and who live all day on The Verge and TechCrunch and iMore and so forth. They then go talk to their friends, and their friends come to them for advice. And so over time, this stuff trickles down to them. And so I think that there's kind of more of an awareness of kind of what the reality of 5G is.
Mhm.
I don't think it's my impression from talking to people that either they go, "Oh yeah, I've heard about that," or worse, "Oh, on my AT&T phone, I already have 5G because it says 5GE." I hear that a lot, unfortunately, and and then I think a lot of people either they don't have much of a knowledge of it at all, in which case it all goes over their head, and they're just buying a phone with a great screen and a really good camera, or they say, okay, well, I have this and it'll be faster, but I'm realistic about it.
Sure.
And I think more and more that's kind of what people are saying.
Last question for you. Are you stepping up to an iPhone 12, or are you waiting for the Pro Max?
I'm waiting for the Pro Max, which will be out early next month, because I have an 11 Pro Max, and I'm on the Apple upgrade program, so I'm really kind of like leasing my iPhones. I turn in this one, and the payments don't change. So, um, and the one I want 5G because I want the experience. I'm a T-Mobile customer, and so kind of to be able to write about it, I want to be able to have a 5G phone so I can experience that. I'm also really an iPhone camera buff, and the camera in the Pro Max. This is the first time in a while where Apple has taken the big phone and given it capabilities that the other Pro phone doesn't have.
Right.
So, like the difference in the way it does optical stabilization, things like that, just kind of really interests me. I do a lot of photos at night. And unfortunately, it's like my cat's sleeping in the living room, and so I really want like a really good night camera, And so the fact that, it has improved the night mode, which was already pretty great, I'm interested in. So I'm doing 5G kind of for professional reasons, but as a personally, the way I use a phone, I'm interested in the cameras.
Well, yeah, and we should finish off on that because that's actually a separate, could be a great separate call. I mean, Apple, and we really didn't spend too much time in that. Apple is really, did I say enough reallys? They are really going after the premium photography person with these new iPhone 12 Pros. I mean, the technology is unbelievable. This whole notion of computational photography. Now they have LiDAR. We didn't even talk about that. LiDAR is a dramatic component to content creation for AI and things like that you can do at a consumer level. It's just amazing. I mean, and some of the formats they're bringing into the new iPhone Pro models is really technology that doesn't appeal to the mainstream user. I mean, things like Dolby, the RAW format. I mean, those are really professional grade level type of technologies. And outside of zoom lenses, I mean, it's really hard to find a reason not to buy an iPhone 12 Pro simply for the photography, and especially video. It does. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry that has popped up where people make movies just using their iPhone, which is just amazing. And you think we got to have and what we'll do is, because I'm waiting for the iPhone 12 Pro Max as well. After we get that, we should have a follow-up call and exchange experiences about that, because we
should geek out over our Pro Maxes.
We will geek out. But then, hey, Dwight, this has been great. Thanks for participating in today's podcast. To the Moor Insights and Strategy audience, thank you for tuning in today. Please follow us in our social media partner list. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week.